Working as an FBI special agent was my dream job. My whistleblowing was apolitical and in the spirit of upholding my oath. Nonetheless, the FBI cynically elected to close ranks and attack the messenger.
The FBI will crush you. This government will crush you and your family if you try to expose the truth about things that they are doing that are wrong. We are all examples of that.
Joining us now are Steve Friend and Garrett O'Boyle. Thanks for joining us, fellas.
FBI whistleblowers Steve Friend and Garrett O'Boyle both join us now. Gentlemen, so glad to have you on the program. Thank you for your testimony.
We need more folks like you, and I'm sure more people are going to be from your background are going to be giving you guys more intel as you're sharing that with the rest of us. We can kind of see that this is becoming normal for them to be held accountable, because I think especially an institution that we pay their salaries, they need to be held accountable.
I think a lot of people do share our beliefs and convictions. I think they just aren't at the point that Steve and I and others have gotten to. They're too afraid.
Thank you so much for being a guest here on PBD Podcast.
Thanks for having us.
How big is that bloody flag that Steve's got? It's the stone wall of his house. Lots of love, guys. Thanks very much for joining us.
Steve Friend, Garrett O'Boyle, thank you for being with us this morning. More importantly, thank you for speaking out. We appreciate it.
You're in the information age, but facts are in short supply. Reject the noise, ask bold questions, and pursue the truth with FBI whistleblowers and founding suspendables Garrett O'Boyle and Steve Friend. This is the American Radicals Podcast.
It is the American Radicals Podcast on a Thursday. Grateful to have you along with us for the ride today on Rumble, rumble.com/AmRadPod. Reminder, you make sure that you smash the thumbs up and follow the channel. If you're following us over at X America News, at X America News on X, we appreciate you there. It's a new experiment we're trying out. And as always, if you listen to the audio form of the podcast on iTunes, Spotify, iHeart, make sure you subscribe so you can get the updated episodes Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, 10:30 Eastern time. Today, we're going to be talking about legacy, which I think will be really interesting to get Garrett's perspective on, because it seems like the only people concerned about legacy are the people that want to get their name on a post office or a football stadium. They might have their eye off the ball on what eternity means. We're going to be doing a retrospective, I guess, a very early retrospective on the former presidency of Joe Biden, talking about his legacy as it pertained to foreign affairs, illegal immigration, corruption at home, and basically just stomping down on the American people. And also wanted to devote a healthy portion of today's show to Leonard Peltier, who was commuted after having murdered 2 FBI agents. We're going to do a deep dive on the history lesson there, just so you know how evil Joe Biden is, and that at most is what his legacy should be for him. Grateful to have you along. Grateful to have Garrett O'Boyle along, my cohort, my partner in crime here on the American Radicals Podcast. Follow him at GOB Actual. He's hopefully growing there, probably falling behind me now that I have gotten on the radar of one Mr. Elon Musk as of last night.
The one and only Elon Musk slipping into Steve's responses, not DMs.
I was extremely excited. I forgot to show it, and I'll throw it up on the screen. A suggestion from Garrett that I do this. This was me yesterday talking about how the FBI is trying to circumvent the executive order on returning to work in the office. And they're interpreting that because it says remote work. They're saying, well, we're going to call it telework, so it doesn't apply to us. And Elon Musk, who's going to oversee the Doge, took note and actually said, noted. Thanks, Elon. Hopefully, maybe you can lift the rest of the shadow ban on my friend Garrett.
Yes, please.
It's magnanimous.
Please.
Now,
help me grow. You know what, though, Steve? With that tweet, I think it's important to note that this is, well, you note it. You already noted it. That's what you do on Twitter. You note things. But you noted that the communists, they're not going away. They're embedding. They're subverting. And it's not just this issue. We see it in with all the DEI stuff. I've been seeing all sorts of stuff from. We've got people sending us the email that the FBI has been receiving. I know you got it from somebody. I got it from somebody. Same things going out across all of the federal agencies. And then you have places like the ATF, or we talked about, now I'm blanking on her name. Janice Carroll, I think, or something like that, the DEI head in the FBI, how they're just changing their title and they're subverting them into the agency. And oh no, they do other duties. Or this morning I saw the head of the DIA, I think it was DIA,
Yes.
he's saying, oh, this doesn't apply to us because our DEI people, that's just an additional part of their duties. And so
Sometimes they take lunch or use the bathroom, so it's not a whole percentage of their time.
yeah. So it's happening all over. It's with the language issue with telework versus uh, remote work, and with DEI. And I'm telling you, not a prophet, but based on my training and experience, as we like to say, you're going to see it probably for the next 4 years at least, because as we've talked about recently, the government writ large leans left and maybe actually totters heavily to the left.
Before we get to the next 4 years, let's talk about the last 4 years. So I tried to pull some stories that reflect on Joe Biden's legacy that maybe aren't getting talked about as much. I think they're going to be known. I mean, I left some of the more higher profile ones. You could nitpick and say, well, Steve, why didn't you pick this one or that story?
Well,
But
because there's so many.
there's just an overabundance of stories we could pull from. So I wanted to just sort of cherry pick a few that I thought reflected on his overall legacy as it pertained to the greater topics of something like a foreign policy or illegal aliens, something like that. So without further ado, let's start on the foreign policy front with the Ukraine, because it's insane in the Ukraine. And I thought that this title here sort of got me thinking about legacy. And actually, there was a remark about legacy in it, which is why it got me on this track for today's show, calling it Legacy. And the title, it comes from Time, is Why Biden's Ukraine Win Was Zelensky's Loss. And they are decrying the situation there. They're actually a little bit harsh on Joe Biden because he should have been more magnanimous and more generous to Ukraine, per Time magazine, leftist rag. But here's a couple of remarks from the piece. When Russia invaded Ukraine nearly 3 years ago, President Joe Biden set 3 objectives for the U.S. response. Ukraine's victory was never among them. Garrett, in the last 3 years, how many times have you heard that Ukraine has to win the war?
I couldn't tell you, man. I mean, I think you'd have to use, I think you'd have to count, you'd have to use all my digits, my fingers, my toes. Can you hear me? I feel like I'm
can hear
getting
you
some.
just fine.
Okay, all right, there we go.
So here's a quote that comes from, again, this is Time magazine, comes from Eric Green, who was on the National Security Council at the time. Quote, we were deliberately not talking about territorial parameters. The more important objective was for Ukraine to survive as a sovereign democrat country free to pursue integration with the West. So the fact that Russia, let's give the maximum benefit of the doubt to the narrative that we were told last week, right?
Which, think of that, prefacing it that way. We're going to give you the maximum benefit, and still.
So Russia invades sovereign country in Ukraine, takes territory. Ukraine still is operating as a country. So that means if you took no action whatsoever, devoted no personnel, resources, material, money, time, energy, anything at all, you've achieved the goal. So that's a little bit like shooting an arrow and then drawing a target around it, right? That's what we're doing here. So the 3 objectives, they weren't worried about the territory that they lost. That wasn't a goal to reclaim that territory. He wanted, according to Time magazine, Joe Biden wanted the U.S. and its allies to remain united. Okay. I don't think that we had to go to war for that.
Right.
And what would result in, I think the reporting was now it's 1.5 million fatalities on both sides combined. So that was number 2. And then number 3 was he wanted to avoid direct conflict between Russia and NATO.
Well,
so
what
again,
do you call...
you could do nothing.
Yeah. I don't even really know what to make of it, to be honest, because I was paying attention to what was happening in Ukraine the last 4 years plus. So now for you to come out with this, oh, this is really what we were doing with Ukraine, well, you're lying. And we know you're lying. It's because this isn't what you're saying now, or at least what's being reported here now, is not what happened, and it's not what you were saying all along until now. So, sorry, but I don't believe you.
And now to the legacy portion. This is where Zelensky is kind of feeling his oats. See, he's got a couple billion in the bank now, so he's up there with like the Bezos of the world. Right, in a podcast that aired in early January, President Zelensky, he's going on podcasts. This guy is supposed to be at risk of death, right? He said that the U.S. had not done enough under the Biden administration to oppose sanctions against Russia and to provide Ukraine with weapons and security guarantees. After Biden announced that he would not run for re-election, the Ukrainians hoped that this lame duck status would free Biden up to bolster his legacy. Quote, for his legacy, is the argument, how will history remember you? Unquote. We gave them $183 billion.
Yeah, it's so it's not enough. At what point is it enough then, Mr. Zelensky? How many green sweatshirts do you need to buy?
Can you
for it
buy
to be
some
an-
from the-suspendables.com?
Oh, you could actually. Speaking of which, hey, we didn't plan this. There it is, the Zelensky
The special.
right there. We got black, blue, and green. We're better than Zelensky in that regard. We got multiple colors, but I, even that, dude, we could literally wipe your country off the face of the earth in a nanosecond. And you're basically going to try to bully us, threaten us, or what? Or now that Biden is out, what, now you're going to gaslight in a way where you're hoping that the new administration will send you even more? What's his angle here? While he's traveling around, going on podcasts, having fake air horn sirens going off when Biden visits him, having his wife travel Paris and buying all sorts of luxury items with part of that, what'd you say, 128 billion that we have sent?
183.
183 billion dollars. Another thing I saw this morning was how there's all sorts of these dams in California that are in massive disrepair, and the state is not repairing them because they don't have any money, because they're in a gross deficit of their own, and they're spending money on all sorts of crazy woke things instead. So instead of having like 107 billion gallons of reserve water in these dams, they don't have any because they don't work properly. Not that I'm for federal government bailing out California entirely, but maybe we should spend that $183 billion right here. I don't know. Maybe increasing that border wall, maybe helping places like California have stores of water and not protecting smelts. Or there's a drove of issues that you could put that money to work for right here. But the
that
guys
wouldn't help you with your legacy. Your legacy was fighting back the big Russian bear, right?
Yes,
You wanted to be a
Evo.
wartime president. You united the world. You kept NATO together and somehow out of war when you could have taken zero action at all, but then you couldn't have got your name on that. So that's what the concern was. And we will spend untold billions of dollars in treasure and spill untold amounts of blood as long as I can say that I was the president that oversaw that, which I think is sort of reflective of the type of person who Joe Biden is, who's worried about his name in this world, maybe not for the next, because he's probably going to wind up in South Hell. They've got nice choice real estate for him there. I'm not judging him. I'm just saying that he's going to, burn forever, never being consumed. I'm just speculating here. Let's move on to illegal aliens. I thought this one was a good one about the CBP1 app.
Yes. Oh, this is great. This is great.
Terminated.
A new sheriff is in town, folks. And I have a feeling, Steve, yes, we will still bring you an adequate dose of black pills because they will still exist. But to be able to cover something like this, it brings me great joy. Carry on.
The CBP1 mobile app from the Biden administration. We developed an app for illegals.
Think of that. How much did that cost? I'm going to see if I can find that real fast.
Hopefully we can use the data and find them now because they agreed to the terms of service.
Yes.
So it allowed 1,450 foreign nationals per day to schedule an appointment at a point of entry to just come on in the country. Biden administration's mobile app established in January 2023. So now we're talking about 2 years it's been in functionality, 919,000 foreign nationals. So about 1 million people
Wow, that is
came across
crazy.
using an app.
That's nuts.
That's a legacy right there
Yeah.
that you can't deny. You've allowed, at a minimum, those million in. You facilitated that. You can't even say that there was negligence going on there. You said, download the app and we will let you in the country.
I mean, dude, that's how you invade a country right there. 1 million people use the app. That that's mind-boggling.
It's just devastating when you think about the overall numbers of people. I mean, how many times have we been told that there's 330 million people and 13 million illegal aliens in this country? I mean, talking to JJ Carroll, talked to him a couple times. He thinks it's 50 million people that came in under the Biden administration. He says it's between 30 and 50. So if he's anywhere in the ballpark,
Yeah.
average would be 40 million, between 30 and 50. 40 million illegal aliens came in. That's the size of California, right? Let's say that he is, I don't know, 75% wrong. 10 million illegal aliens in 4 years.
Yeah. Dude. That is a devastating number. When you just think of I mean, clearly I'm speechless over here, because when you think of the gravity of a number like that just being inserted into a nation, and the suck that is going to take from the public coffers for forever, really, as long as they're here. Well, I guess I need to alter my language, Steve, because like I mentioned, we've got a new sheriff in town. So maybe, and what Trump ran on, is that this type of thing isn't going to continue. Now, what do you do about even just the million that were on the CBP One app, much less the 10 million on the low end or the 50 million on the high end that are here? That's a full-time job for hundreds of thousands of federal agents forever. I'd have to put a little more thought into this, but I kind of want to float it out there. A buddy of mine who I went to Iraq with, he listens. I don't know if he's listening today, but he typically tunes in. We were texting back and forth, and he was like, dude, get me down on the border or get me into JTTF to help fight the cartels. And I thought, you know what? That's actually not a bad idea. Rally up the GWAT vets, especially your combat arms ones who know how to manipulate a weapon. They probably know how to take people into custody. We had dudes handcuffed and black bagged pretty regularly. Now you'd have to probably run them through a constitutional law course or something like that.
You can't just go to people's pockets.
Right. But get them, get them a job with CBP, and hey, where do you live? Oh, I live in Detroit, Michigan. Okay, well, there's plenty of illegals there, I'm sure, because it's similar to Milwaukee and there's plenty of them here. So just rally the troops in a new way and probably give them a little bit of, veterans a bit of a mission and a drive again. And I don't know. I think it's kind of a good idea.
Saw earlier this morning that there was some sort of assistance mission assigned to some of the federal law enforcement agencies. So DEA, U.S. Marshals, and ATF were given a directive to assist with deportations. I did note that the FBI wasn't included there. We're probably waiting on new management.
Yeah,
that would be what I would presume. But you mentioned the GWAT, which I think is a good jumping off for something else. You talk about foreign policy and calamity. I would be derelict in my duty here without just bringing up the announcement of the withdrawal from Afghanistan, which I know was really meaningful to you and to your brothers in arms there. This is Biden himself talking about the withdrawal. This is your legacy, former Mr. President of the United States, who was very happy with the way things went.
I can also report to the American people, we're the first president in decades who's not leaving a war in Afghanistan to his successor. But we've got bin Laden during the Obama-Biden administration. The primary objective of war had been accomplished. And I believe that going forward, the primary threat of al-Qaeda would no longer be emanating from Afghanistan, but from elsewhere. And so we not need to station a sizable number of American forces in Afghanistan. So when I took office, I had a choice. Ultimately, I saw no reason to keep thousands of servicemen in Afghanistan. I commend the courage of all those who served in Afghanistan. We grieve all 2,461 Americans who made the ultimate sacrifice in the longest war in American history. And I grieve those brave service members whose lives were lost during the withdrawal. We also thank those inside and outside of government who have done so much to help thousands of Afghan families resettle in the United States. And by ending the war, we've been able to focus our energy and resources on more urgent challenges. There is nothing, I can tell you from my conversations with both Xi and Putin, nothing our adversaries and competitors like Russia and China would have liked more than seeing us to continue to be tied down in Afghanistan for another decade. For all those reasons, ending the war was the right thing to do. And I believe history will reflect that.
Nothing better than the cough at the end to show his feebleness as a commander-in-chief there.
Yeah.
I think there was a valid argument to be made. Why are we in Afghanistan? But the way we left, I think, is pretty reflective of his legacy at the helm.
Yeah, I concur with that. It's more gaslighting. And the thumbnail today, I think, is pretty fitting because that ice cream cone that he's eating in that thumbnail, it's literally his brain at this point, and it's melting out of his mouth, and you can hardly make sense of what he's even
He's not
saying.
gonna be able to eat any ice cream from South Hell, man. It's gonna be that will be his personal hell. He'll never get a scoop again.
Yes, it'll be too hot. But also, man, the Afghanistan thing, that whole minute or so of that clip, I was just trying to contain my rage because of the gaslighting and the lying. And I 100%, as someone who's been to Afghanistan, as someone who wears the bracelet of a friend who was killed there, and I know other people who were killed and maimed and wounded, and many who came home not the same. We're not the same. I don't think any of us are who we once were after going to Afghanistan or Iraq or whatever. That being said, the withdrawal was an absolute atrocity. I will always say we should not have been in Afghanistan that long. The GWAT shouldn't have been carried out that long. But how we did it was undoubtedly just to increase the military industrial complex, just to line the pockets of somebody like a Joe Biden. And he mentions Xi and Putin and how they couldn't be more happy, or they would have been happier if we would have stayed. That's not true, because almost immediately after we got out of there, China struck a deal with the Taliban for precious minerals that are there for to the tune of like $1 trillion. I mean, that's open source material. Just type in China, Afghanistan, Taliban deal, and I bet you'll be able to find all sorts of stuff about it. And but just to hear him up there, proud, acting like this is a good piece of his legacy. Tell that to the 13 service members who were the last to die there because of the abortion that was the withdrawal from Afghanistan. Tell that even to the Afghans who are trying to climb up onto U.S. military air and then falling off to their death or freezing if they got inside the wheel well. There's all sorts of horror stories like that. There's videos of that. So, no, Joe, it's not another good part of your legacy. It's another good riddance part of your legacy.
When you're worried about your legacy first, as opposed to just doing the right thing, you get something like Afghanistan, which is why they wanted to withdraw by September 11th, 2021, so they could have a 20 years since 9/11 anniversary sort of talking point. Like, that was very strategic in the way that they picked the timing of the withdrawal, and they rushed it in order to get it done by that arbitrary date that meant nothing to anyone except you, because you're worried about your legacy. I mean, if you're worried about your legacy in this time, then your priorities are wrong. You should just do good things because they're good to do in and of themselves, right? Like, if I want to talk about my legacy for my children, I want them to remember that I did the right thing. I didn't invent doing the right thing.
Right.
It's just good in itself to do. But if you're worried about putting your name on the post office or saying you were a wartime president or you're the president that got us out, then your priorities are all jacked up. You're not worried about doing the right thing. You're just worried about doing the thing that will get your name on it.
Yes. And you said something a moment ago to the effect of, if you're if you're worried about your legacy more than you are doing the right thing. And boy, does that not strike to the heart of the matter with so many issues across government and all the way down the totem pole to, oh, I don't know, Steve, maybe your low level infantry private or your low level GS 10, 11, 12, or 13, 18, 11 federal investigator. How many are, I have my plans. I have this legacy that I want to build. And so I can someday be a retired DEA agent or whatever and have my shadow box with all my
Shadow box
coins.
and a folded flag. The folded
Mhm.
flag, like I don't know, you're a war widow, but
Right.
it's
Yeah.
apparently a big deal.
Yes. And that's more important. That by and large is more important than just doing the right thing, which is what you swore to do. You swore an oath to do that. But hey, what do I know?
So I've got a couple stories about the home front and how they just utter disregard for middle America. And I thought it was important to go to a story that's been a little bit forgotten. I mean, everybody remembers East Palestine, the
Mm.
train derailment and the explosion of the chemicals that were there. And then we
What's
just kind
Pete
of moved on.
Buttigieg doing now, Steve? Do you know?
He's breastfeeding, oh, I'm sorry, chest feeding his 2 children, which he had to take 12 weeks off because of the suffering and recovering from the delivery process, I guess.
Sure.
So two connecting pieces. This one comes from the Government Accountability Project, and they're talking about a lawsuit they have. It's a FOIA lawsuit to try to get some transparency here. Government Accountability Project called GAP. They're asking for transparency as local residents in East Palestine continue to struggle with health issues nearly 2 years later. Community members need relocation and Medicare assistance, which could have been provided, but they have not gotten the reports that are needed to do it to show how toxic the area is. So the GAP then wound up going over and connecting with the Highwire, which Tracy Beans writes for as well. And this is a story that they have, and the train derailment came from that company, Norfolk Southern. The title is Norfolk Southern accused of covering up health concerns by independent contaminant evaluator and East Palestine citizens. What the heck's going on here? And this is the legacy of the Biden administration, the corruption and the utter disregard for the well-being of your fellow citizens just because they were from a forgettable location that we don't have to think about anymore. Let's just concern ourselves with higher-minded things. So there was an independent evaluator. His name is Scott Smith. That's not a pseudonym. It's actually his name. He told the Highwire that they were cherry picking testing locations to tell a false narrative of the potential chemicals the residents are still exposed to today. Quote, the EPA is going upwind. They're declaring no contamination and they're not doing proper controls. We went 6 miles northwest of East Palestine where we know the plume wasn't. I identified where the dioxin hot zones are. The EPA refused to do it. The railroad refused to do it. Over 50% of my results are good news. Around 45% of my results identify dioxin hot zones. So he was able to find a lot more. Basically, this is another quote, the EPA is captured and corrupted.
You don't say.
It is functioning as a public relations arm for Norfolk Southern. EPA emergency response official. So this guy's from the EPA. His name is Mark Durno. He admitted that to the citizens on tape, it was recorded, thank goodness, that the residents were exposed to dangerous chemicals, and he wished his agency would have set up temporary relocation programs sooner. Now, here's where it gets really corrupt because this Smith independent evaluator said that EPA is basically doing PR spin for Norfolk Southern. Okay, so the EPA allows corporate contractors. So Norfolk Southern hires scientists to go and see how bad it is, and the EPA accepts their data and their findings, which could be accurate, but they're definitely spun to minimize liability, we'll say.
Right.
And that's the data that the EPA relies on when they are stating that there are low levels and no detections of any harmful chemicals whatsoever in East Palestine.
What's it going to take, Steve? What is it going to take for people in a place like the EPA to just do the right thing, like we were just talking about, just to say, wouldn't you rather have that be your legacy? where forever you can look yourself in the mirror. And then even when you're gone, your kids, their kids, they'll say, man, granddad or grandma or whoever the EPA worker was, they did the right thing and they instilled those values in me. Is it going to take a heavy hand from someone like a Donald Trump to say, hey, we're just going to tell the people the truth? We're going to get a second opinion. We're going to get some other scientists out here that aren't on the hook with the railroad company, maybe not even through the EPA, maybe just private contract the whole thing out. Because it just, when you talk about Russia, for instance, and we hear all the talk about how bad Russia is and the oligarchy, and there's all these oligarchs that are in bed with Putin, and it's so bad and evil. It's not free like it is here. This is exactly what that is. This is a part of the American oligarchy. It's not different at all from how the Jen Moores of the world go and get a job at GE Aerospace, or the Sean Clarks go and get a job at BDO. They have their security clearance, or all the employees who end up working for Meta or Amazon that came from government, that have security clearances, that GLAD handed them the last couple years of their tenure in government, and then they get their pension, and then they go and work in the private sector. I'd like to know how many former EPA officials are working at a place what's it called? Not Florida Southern. It's called the Norfolk Southern. How many EPA officials end up working at a place like that? I bet you the number would be a lot. And that is how an oligarchy gets built.
The concern is not for the people that are there. They're just forgettable. They're just the plebes, right? That's why, I can even tie this into the next two. I'll throw them up. I went over to the Federal Reserve and then just did a simple search for the average price of ground beef from January 20th, 2021 through December of 2024.
Dude,
went from $3.98 to $5.60.
That is devastating as well.
Or I could go to a dozen eggs.
Oh,
which was from $1.60 to $4.15.
Okay, I want to touch on the egg thing right now, because I saw this morning again that President Trump signed some, I don't know, some not ordinance. I don't even think it was an executive order, but he basically sent out an order that I don't even remember whichever agency has been sending out the fear mongering regarding bird flu, because eggs are about to spike. If you eat a lot of eggs, I eat a lot of eggs. We eat a lot of eggs here, but go stock up, because the prices are about to go up, because they've been getting destroyed over some fear mongering over bird flu. Which, guess what, people? All you got to do is wash your eggs, wash your hands, and you'll probably be okay. Or also, if you get the flu, you're gonna be okay. Most of you are gonna be all right. I'd rather have my eggs at $1 a dozen or whatever they were.
The legacy here is not just forgetting the regular people in East Palestine, right? It's telling everyone, all of us who have to buy yellow tag beef now, or are struggling to get any sorts of protein, so we all had to go to eggs because beef was too darn expensive, that, yeah, those prices aren't as high as you think. They're just not.
Dude,
you've never had a better. Why are you complaining?
Yes.
We have left you the best economy in the world. You're welcome.
And then even if that line of thinking or quote unquote argument doesn't work, then they'll say, yeah, but wouldn't you rather pay more so trans people can have safety or whatever? And it's like, what? No, I'm fine. I want cheap eggs. All right. I got a family to feed and I don't have an income. So I want some cheap eggs. I just saw in the chat from that Jen Chang, she just bought a dozen eggs for $10 on sale.
Jen, when did you move to Hawaii? What's the matter? Oh my gosh.
California, I think.
All right. I want to go over to the story to spend a healthy portion on it, because there was all this talk in the waning days, Joe Biden trying to establish his legacy, and not just give pardons to his family, but he had to give the pardon to the Native American activist who's been wrongly imprisoned, we're reliably told, for the last 50 years, Mr. Leonard Peltier.
Oh man.
So we're going to
Folks,
do a history lesson on
yeah,
this one.
if you aren't mad yet, and I told Steve I only know the Reader's Digest version of this because it connects to my hometown of Milwaukee, but this is gonna make you really, really black-pilled, I think.
This connects to my experience in the FBI too. So I'm pretty familiar with it, but I made sure that I had all my facts straight. I actually pulled some source documents on it. But this guy's name is Leonard Peltier. First story comes from the Washington Post because democracy dies in darkness. Biden
You know what,
commutes.
Steve? I don't think I will ever not laugh when you say that. I really don't.
The Biden commutes sentence for Leonard Peltier, convicted in FBI killings. At least the title was accurate, right? But then they go to the subtitle and it says the Native American activist is in poor health and has long said he did not receive a fair trial and was not culpable in the 1975 slayings. It's just wrong place, wrong time, I guess.
Sure.
But the story from WAPO is in one of his final acts as president, Joe Biden commuted the life sentence of Native American activist Leonard Peltier, whose case became a rallying cry for the indigenous movement. Okay. Since his conviction for killing 2 FBI agents, but whose release drew swift opposition from law enforcement officials, including Kash Patel. Biden, in a statement, cited those health concerns to explain his decision, saying that commutation would allow Peltier to serve the remainder of his sentence at home without being pardoned for his crime. So his legacy is he struck a deal, right? I mean, he was a principled guy. This guy was either in the wrong or he needed some sort of compassionate release, but he has to stay in the house. So you should just know your role and shut your hole, according to Joe Biden and his legacy. Now, before I get to the details of this case, which I have fully, this occurred on the Standing Rock Reservation, Pine Ridge, South Dakota. I know people on that reservation. I worked in Sioux City, which is just a state away. This is South Dakota. I was in Iowa. My reservations were in Nebraska. They were neighboring states. I worked with guys that were on the Pine Ridge Reservation. So I'm pretty familiar with it. And I'm also taking quite a bit of umbrage because I know the work that I did was not appreciated. And I was okay with that because you just leave me alone and I'll accomplish the mission. The mission as I saw it when I raised my hand and swore an oath to potentially risk my life to protect people who were really vulnerable against fraud and force. And it was not appreciated. That was fine. I mean, I figured it was a nice trade for a looser dress code. That was no oversight, no boss in my life. Fantastic, unappreciated, never getting any award. I'm certainly not getting a shadow box for doing it. But when you then see 2 of the guys that were doing that work get executed, as we will find out, and then their murderer gets to go home free because the president's worried about his legacy, that's pouring a whole bunch of salt into wounds that I didn't even know I had incurred in almost a decade of doing that sort of work. So let's get to the facts of the case, which I actually got from the FBI's website, where they actually have a full accounting of the story.
Really?
Yeah. And it's referred to as ResMers case. It's an abbreviation for reservation murders. And that's what they do. I mean, what did they use for January 6th? I forget.
Oh, wasn't it just like Capitol Riot? But it was
it wasn't Fedsurrection. I know that. It should
Yeah,
have. All right. So this actually comes from FBI.gov. So if you're interested in reading about it, I'm going to do a pretty deep dive on it, which I think is worth doing. But it's called the ResMers case. It happened in 1975 in the summertime on the Standing Rock Reservation in Pine Ridge, South Dakota. In fact, that's a pretty massive size reservation, like way bigger than my reservations. They had 12 agents in that office and they had surged another 6 to it. They had 12.5 agents. For perspective, and I don't know what the manpower was in the 70s for the FBI, but in today's FBI, there are 150 agents who work on Indian reservations.
That's not that many.
18 out of 150 would be over 10% of your manpower on one reservation. That's how bad and violent that particular reservation is. It's definitely one of the more off the chain reservations, particularly in the Midwest. Okay. So
I'm not gonna lie, Steve, I saw that movie Pine Ridge and I was like, that would be sweet. That'd be
in
some
River or Pine Ridge?
Oh, that
Look,
whatever.
just before we get to the story, Wind River,
Wind River.
I gotta say, they don't send the newbie agent from Las Vegas with no investigative experience to an RA resident agency that is staffed by 4 agents who I knew to go and investigate murders. And if you get into a shootout inside of a trailer, you don't just walk away. There's probably an investigation. Fun movie though.
Yeah.
All right. Back to the Resmers case here, reporting from the FBI.
For any of you who are interested in applying to the FBI, Steve is right. It's not what they make it out to be in Hollywood.
Leonard Peltier, he was not from Pine Ridge at all, right? At the time of the murders, Peltier was the subject of an outstanding federal warrant for unlawful flight to avoid prosecution, which is basically a federal warrant. When somebody runs and tries to go on the run, the locals come to the Fed and say, hey, he's outside our jurisdiction. Can you help us? Can you use some of your resources? They get what's called a UFAP, an unlawful flight to avoid prosecution. That's the acronym. They federalize the charge, and then they grab them up. And when they get them, they normally just drop the UFAP case and they hand it back over because the guy's in custody. That's the way that they work with local partners. The UFAP warrant was issued after Peltier fled Milwaukee, which is close to your neck of the woods there, Nineveh, to avoid apprehension and prosecution for the attempted murder of an off-duty police officer in that city. So this Native American activist, he had a proclivity, shall we say, to try to kill members of law enforcement. All right.
Yes, he wanted to do that. That seemed to be a big piece of his MO, his modus operandi.
So the date here of the occurrence is June 26, 1975. The agents who wound up losing their life that day were Ron Williams and Jack Kohler. They were on the reservation. They were attempting to actually locate someone different who had an active warrant. It was, I think it was a robbery warrant. And that guy's name was Jimmy Eagle. That checks. That's an Indian name. There is, I've seen a lot of white bears and big fires. There's some fun names. There's no evidence the agents were even aware that Leonard Peltier was in the area. And he was a member of some activist group called AIM, which was rabble rousing on various different reservations and traveling around trying to stir things up. All right. So the incident here, and again, comes from FBI.gov. At approximately 11:50 a.m., other agents overheard a radio transmission in which the 2 agents, Agent Williams and Kohler, advised that they had spotted a red and white vehicle and they were going to stop it. And there was evidence that this red and white vehicle was tied to the guy they were actually looking for, this Jimmy Eagle. Williams and Kohler were in separate vehicles, so they were coordinating with each other as real police officers do. Leonard Peltier and 2 other guys, Norman Charles and Joe Stuntz, were actually the people who were in the vehicle that they wound up trying to do a traffic stop on. So it was a case, I guess, of like a misidentifying a person. You see a vehicle of interest connected to your bad guy, you find a reason to pull it over, and it winds up having, it's dry hole, right? But you have some sort of probable cause for the stop. You don't just randomly see a red car and pull it over. So we have to presume that they were doing their due diligence in that regard. But they happen to have really bad luck, and they tried to pull over this red and white vehicle that had Leonard Peltier, who was on the run for trying to kill a cop. So the next radio transmission, which came across, they weren't just communicating with each other. The radios are all synced up, so the people in the office could hear the radio. And this is what they reported having heard. And because it doesn't record, it's not like a normal police department. The FBI doesn't record the radio transmissions, but this is what they reported. The next radio transmission overheard, which was only a few seconds later, Williams stated that the vehicle they were pursuing had stopped, the occupants had exited, and they appeared that they were preparing to fire at the agents. In the last radio transmission monitored, Williams was giving directions to other agents on how to get to his and Kohler's location. Williams warned an agent who was back at the office, his name was Gary Adams, that if they did not get there quickly, they were dead. Williams announced that both he and Kohler had been hit and gunfire could be heard in the background of the transmission. All right, pause it there, Garrett. Like, I get chills just even reading that off.
Yep. I'm captivated just listening. So it's, thankfully, Steve, I've never been in an OIS, an officer involved shooting. Not as a police officer, not as a cop. I mean, those are the same things. A little bit of redundancy for you there, Steve, but not as an FBI agent or as a cop. And uh, we both did the SWAT thing. I even there, sure, maybe a little, as far as FBI work goes, at least these days, a little more intense on certain occasions. As a cop, a couple things that maybe came close. Definitely had to point my gun a few times at people, but thankfully never got in an OIS. But the sound of battle, I guess, is or gunshots, at least I've heard in over the radio on deployment. But it's hearing a harrowing story like this is it really does give you chills, because and we talk about it all the time. We are a land of laws. And so as much as we rail on the FBI, as much as we rail on bad law enforcement, which I think is appropriate, it must be because they swore an oath, and oftentimes we see them not upholding that oath. That being said, there are still many good men and women out there who do the job, and some who end up on the wrong side of evil, of wickedness, like we see here in the Peltier case. And just to hear that description of what was happening, and I mean, imagine your colleagues, your friends, many of them become your friends. It's like any job, but now to hear them on the radio saying, if you don't get here, we're going to die, that pierces, man.
I've been on duty when you hear the alert tones for an officer involved shooting, and that's pretty dramatic. I've been in some skirmishes where I had to go on the radio and ask for assistance.
Yeah, send me more.
Yeah, I mean, I've given a 10-3. I don't know if you had the same. Like I need
1078
you
for us.
here,
Yeah.
like yesterday, and to hear the cavalry coming, and knowing that support network is there. But here, the reservations are massive. I mean, help could be an hour away. I don't know where they were geographically on that reservation. It gets into like how fast they were going. They were driving over 90 miles an hour to get there.
Wow.
To try to help. I mean, having heard your colleagues who you probably have a good working relationship, because it's a pretty tight knit community. I mean, I'm relatively tight with guys that I didn't even work with who weren't in my office, just because we kind of had that bond.
Yeah, I bet.
And so,
Well, and I think there's something to be said, and you could talk to this probably a little bit better than me, as far as FBI goes. When I think of the totality of my time in law enforcement, I built better bonds with guys I was a cop with than I did with guys I was an FBI agent with. There was one or two guys that we built a better bond than I did with other agents, just by happenstance, maybe not. I don't know. Both of them were cops beforehand too, but I believe that it's that those hard things that you go through together, or those unique and difficult things, or the as you go through law enforcement, you encounter some bizarre things that most people don't really understand. And when you're going through that with other people and you have that shared experience, it builds a stronger bond. And I think with res work, a guy I was a cop with, actually, he's an FBI agent and he works on a res, and he told me, he's like, yeah, man, this is about as close to police work that you're going to get in the FBI. And I've heard you say that before. And so I imagine with some other agents that work the res, there probably is a different type of bond.
I mean, I similarly to you, I was closer with police officers. I was actually, as an FBI agent, closer to police officers, like the tribal police officers
Oh, I bet.
worked with all the time. And I probably told this before, but you get this, you walk in the room as an FBI agent and you got the badge and the creds, and the cops are all like kind of wowed by that, because you're the NFL athlete, right? If they have any ambition in law enforcement, they want to get what you're at.
Mm-hmm.
And they can't wait to throw their federale bona fides at you and say like, well, I was on this task force, or I want to be on the task force.
Yep.
And I was always the opposite. I'm like, oh no, I used to be the police.
That's how, yeah. all the time, just wherever I'd go, some sheriff's office or police department. Hey, I'm with the FBI. Wait, I used to be a cop.
I put hands on people, I promise.
Yeah.
Right.
Or I'd call them up. hey, FBI, and I'm like, but I used to be a police officer.
But way better war stories from the cop days. All right. So as Agent Adams, who's responding, he responded with 2 BIA, Bureau of Indian Affairs police officers. Again, these are guys who are the street police in the area. Some reservations have them. Pine Ridge does, where the federal government actually provides and funds and trains the police officers. So they're really the most squared away, by and large. Police officers are these guys. They arrived in the immediate area. They also came under fire. So now you have more people getting brought into the war zone. As other agents and officers from numerous agencies, now it's an agency assist, arrived, they received sniper fire, which continued throughout the afternoon. It hampered the rescue attempts, and the agents' bodies, as they both perished, they were not discovered until 4:25 p.m., which was 4.5 hours after the whole thing happened. That's how delayed it was. So some evidence that was recovered. Again, this is Leonard Peltier, who Joe Biden gave a commutation to because there's a dispute over whether or not he was the guilty party here. Examination of the agent's weapons showed that 1 round had been fired from Agent Kohler's handgun, 2 rounds from Agent Williams' handgun, 1 round from Agent Kohler's .308 rifle, and 1 round from Agent Kohler's shotgun. That's 5 rounds that the FBI got off. The agent's weapons, fired 5 rounds. The agent's vehicle contained 125 bullet holes. That doesn't include rounds that missed the vehicle. So they were pretty much outgunned. This total does not include rounds that did not hit the agents. That hit the agents, the windows, and that were misses. According to witnesses, 7 persons were believed to have been firing at the 2 agents who lost their lives, Williams and Kohler. Williams received a bullet wound to his left arm and side, foot, right hand, and head. Kohler received bullet wounds to his arm and head. Examination of the evidence concluded that agents Williams and Kohler had been killed at close range by a .223 type bullet. According to witnesses, Peltier was the only person in possession of a weapon that fired a .223 type of bullet at the time of the murders. So pretty compelling evidence. Oh, and also their guns got stolen, the FBI agents, which would mean that your bad guys got close enough to them to take their guns, which means they stood over them and executed them with an AR-15 in the head.
Yep.
And the only person who had the AR-15 was Leonard Peltier. And just a little bit more information about the type of guy who Leonard was, who was already fleeing because he had attempted to kill a cop in Milwaukee. And now it appears he may have executed 2 FBI agents who just happened to make a traffic stop on him. This is, again, from FBI.gov. It talks about the aftermath of the Rez murders. The reservation murders happened in Pine Ridge, 1975. So a couple months later, September, there was a station wagon that blew up in Kansas near Wichita, a year old.
Oh boy.
And they found a whole bunch of burned up weapons in there that included the agents' weapons. The car blew up. They don't really, I think it got too close to the exhaust pipe. And the associates who I mentioned earlier of Peltier were found with the vehicle. Peltier began traveling in an RV around the country. An Oregon state trooper stopped the RV based on his description, and he got out of the RV and fired at the trooper, and then he ran away. And inside the RV, they found one of the agent's handguns. Had Peltier's fingerprints on it. Peltier then fled to Canada, where he hid out on an Indian reservation until he was apprehended by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. The Mounties got him, and the Mounties asked if he knew why he was wanted, and Peltier made this following statement, that the 2 FBI agents were shot when they came to his house to serve a warrant on him.
Wow.
That's Leonard Peltier. Now, he's in custody. The trials start. His associates actually get acquitted. They used a self-defense theory. The self-defense theory was that the lawmen, the FBI agents, had cultivated an environment of fear on the reservation. So in self-defense of themselves, they had to shoot over 100 rounds at the agents who did a traffic stop on them. And they won. All
That's
right.
crazy. That's
And
crazy.
also there was some problems. There were some key witnesses that the FBI couldn't locate in time for the trial.
Hmm.
So they didn't have the strongest possible case. They found those people for Peltier and they brought him in. And that later became grounds for Peltier saying that, well, it wasn't a fair trial because you had all the evidence for mine and not my friends. Right? That's sort of the case he made. He went to trial in Fargo. They got a venue change.
Hmm.
He went to North Dakota. And so this is 2 years later, April 1977, 5-week jury trial. Leonard Peltier convicted 2 counts, first-degree murder. After his incarceration, Peltier was involved in an armed escape from the federal pen
Wow.
in California. Another inmate was shot and killed during the escape. He was recaptured after a farmer reported to the sheriff that a man had confronted him with a rifle, took his shoes and truck. Peltier was convicted of the escape and of being a felon in possession of a firearm. So they made sure to stack those charges on him. The conviction was affirmed on appeal. So he had some extra charges there, which would mean that Joe Biden commuted his sentence not just for the murders, but for escape and being a felon in possession.
So, without knowing all those details until now, I already had arrived at the conclusion because I knew the basics, the Reader's Digest version. I'd already arrived at the conclusion that Peltier should have been executed a few decades ago, and I won't make any qualms about that. I think capital punishment is warranted. I won't right now, but I could make a very strong biblical perspective on why that's the case. That being said, when you add all these details together, and we're talking about Joe Biden's legacy today, who in the history of America would think or want this to be part of their legacy? For those who were watching, you might have seen it as Steve was putting some of that up on the screen. It even said that Christopher Wray of all people, was opposed to Peltier's 2024 request for pardon or whatever it was. I don't remember exactly how it was worded. And I want to read this from a retired agent. He texted me this the other day. He said, Biden pardoned Peltier. Absolutely disgraceful. Even Clinton and Obama declined to pardon Peltier. A real middle finger to law enforcement. Peltier should have been executed for his crimes. Concur, 100%. He went on after I responded back to him. He said, Peltier won't escape final justice from God. I think the Peltier pardon should be part of the failed legacy of Christopher Wray. And it certainly is a piece of Christopher Wray's failed legacy, even if he was against it, because look at how far the agency has fallen in just a few years under Christopher Wray. And Joe Biden, though, and Peltier himself, this will forever be part of their legacies too. And look, I certainly do believe that people can change and people can repent and people can be restored, at least from an eternal perspective. That doesn't mean you get to escape punishment. And regardless of what Peltier believes now or thinks now or whatever remorse he holds, it does not wash away what he has done.
All right, so I have a palate cleanse, and it's sort of, I think, legacy related. But before we get to that, Garrett, you have any final closing remarks for us today as we've talked about legacy?
I do. So, Book of Proverbs. I'm sure people won't be shocked by that anymore whenever I say Book of Proverbs. And we're in chapter 6, and I've read verses 16 through 19 before. But so I'm going to back up a little bit. And actually, I'll read those first real quick. There are 6 things that the Lord hates, 7 that are an abomination to him: haughty eyes, a lying tongue, and hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked plans, feet that make haste to run to evil, a false witness who breathes out lies, and one who sows discord among brothers. I think that is absolutely true for Joe Biden's legacy. All of those, all 6 that the Lord hates and all 7 that are an abomination, are part of Joe Biden's legacy. But if you back up a little bit, starting in verse 12, it says, a worthless person, a wicked man goes about with crooked speech. winks with his eyes, signals with his feet, points with his finger, with perverted heart devises evil, continually sowing discord. Therefore, calamity will come upon him suddenly. In a moment, he will be broken beyond healing. And as much as I think that that's true for Joe Biden, that we have seen him become broken over the last few years from a physical standpoint, from a mushy melted vanilla ice cream cone standpoint. And I think it's only going to continue. I think he's an example of a Romans 1 type of person who has been turned over to their reprobate mind. The ultimate would be in his final days, because I don't think he's going to live very much longer. But in his final days, if he came out and repented and said, hey, I have been a failed, miserable Catholic my whole life. I have been a liar and a crook and a deceiver and wicked, and I'm sorry, and I've turned my life to Christ. That would be the ultimate. I don't think it's going to happen. I think he's been turned over. But Joe Biden's legacy is one of wickedness.
That would be a definite 180 on the legacy if somebody were to make such a move. So the theme of the day was legacy, and there's a new Superman movie coming out. It's called Superman Legacy, which I thought was appropriate. And then also wanted to combine it with the Batman video that we had last time. I found this one on Superman, and I just got a crack out of it. So this will be our palate cleanse for today. This is Superman versus the economy.
Do not worry, citizens. I am here now. What seems to be the problem?
Superman, thank God you're here. You're not going to believe this. This is the worst yet.
Let me guess. Did Lex Luthor escape from prison?
No, even worse. Inflation is up almost 8%.
What?
Yeah, due to years of misguided congressional spending and international conflict, gasoline is almost up $1. What are we going to do?
Well, say, friend, you point me in the direction of this inflation fella, and I'll give him a piece of my mind.
Yeah, well, it's not really a tangible thing.
So it's a ghost of some sort.
And no, it's more of an economical byproduct of financial mismanagement, misguided political decision-making over the course of the last couple decades.
Oh. All right.
So, what are you going to do?
Have you tried buying an electric car?
Electric? It's the 1960s.
Listen, if a plane is falling out of the sky, I can catch that. That's really my area of expertise. This, I really don't think I can do anything here.
But you're Superman. You could do anything. You don't have, like, an inflation-lowering laser beam you can shoot at you? Don't answer that.
Yeah, okay. I'm sorry about this. If you have a cat stuck in a tree, just call my name. I'll hear it.
Yeah, real big thanks, Superman. God, tax season's gonna kill me.
You could always just not pay them.
What? No, you have to pay it. Wait, have you been paying your tax?
Up and away!
Superman, tax evasion. That'll probably be the next project for a future IRS administration that is not about protecting Americans. So, all right, guys, thank you very much for joining us today. Hope it was enlightening. Hope you learned something, especially about those Res Mers case. Advise you to go to the FBI website if you want to find out the full details there. But I appreciate you, as always, for joining us here on the American Radicals podcast, on Rumble, on @XAmericaNews, and on the iTunes and Spotify and iHeart audio formats. And we'll be back with you Saturday, 10:30 Eastern time. And until then, guys, have a great day. And I'm going to leave you with the time this time. Garrett, send us off with a salute.
You've been listening to the voice of the Suspendables on the American Radicals podcast. Follow us on rumble.com/AmRadPod.